What's up, Sooner Nation? Welcome to the SI Sooners Podcast. Man, we got some good stuff today on the old Zoom with Romandre, Stevenson, and Ronnie Perkins. Yes, plus, I thought some really good stuff from the Sooners' two captains. And where can you find that content, Parker?
Well, John, it would stand to reason that seeing as how we're here on the SI Sooners Podcast, we would be advocating for you to head over to SI Sooners, allsooners.com, to check everything from today and from this weekend, and check it all out. Give it all a look over, because there's been plenty of interesting stuff from both the players and the coaches this week, and there should be plenty more as we get closer and closer to game day against Kansas and as we progress into the final month of the Big 12 season.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. SI Sooners, allsooners.com. Check it out. Content loading up there all the time. I'm John Hoover. I'm in Tulsa. That's Parker Thune. He's in Norman. Thanks for listening once again to the SI Sooners Podcast. And, of course, everybody who's watching on my YouTube channel, thank you guys, too. We are a Sports Illustrated Network affiliate. What would be great for us, very helpful, is if you could give us a like, a comment, a rating, or just share the SI Sooners Podcast on social media. It really helps. Really does help little guys like us. So, okay, Parker. Sooners got out of Lubbock largely unscathed, I think we can say. They got their best defensive player back. They got their arguably best offensive player back, except for maybe Spencer Rattler, maybe. We'll see. And you know what? They're back home this week, literally for the first time in 6 weeks. On Saturday, it will be, I couldn't believe this, exactly 6 weeks since they played in Norman. I don't know if that's ever happened in school history, and Lincoln Riley said the exact same thing this week. What chance, Parker, does Kansas have of springing a trap this week?
John, I hate that this is even a question because there's literally no chance. There is literally no chance that Oklahoma doesn't win this game on Saturday. I would literally bet my life on it because, look, Kansas is a bad enough team with Puka Williams. Without Puka Williams, what do they have left? What is their recourse if not to hand the ball off to Puka Williams? So, we saw Kansas in Lawrence last year become the first team all season to score on Oklahoma in the first quarter, and that was about as far as they got. I don't even know if they get this far this Saturday. So, look, for all intents and purposes, this is a bye week. It may not be designated as one on the schedule, but believe me, you will see the second team in very early in this game, no later than the third quarter. It's going to be a romp for Oklahoma, and that's no disrespect to Kansas or the direction of the program under Les Miles. The reality is that program has been mired in the cellar of the Big 12 for the last decade, and they've got some work to do. They've got a lot of work to do to dig themselves out of that hole. And so, although they have a great guy for the job in Les Miles, he's still working with David Beatty players, right? And there's always going to be some time before you start to see some turnover and you get a coach that is able to get his recruits in and change the direction of the program. But it's pretty clear that that's not happening for Kansas, at least not this year, as they head into this game 0-7.
Hey, now, Velton Gardner is a good running back. Andrew Parchment is a good receiver. Yeah, no, it's not going to happen. There's a reason, Parker, that when we got whenever we get Lincoln Riley, or used to be Bob Stoops at the weekly press conference, right, for Kansas week, there's a reason that nobody asks any questions about actually playing Kansas. Well, one or two people do, but usually it's because it's just a massive beatdown waiting to happen. It's a one-sided game. It's a stepping stone for the Sooners' ultimate goals. What this game means, it's to me, it's just a means to an end for OU. The end, of course, being next week's open date for now, then the showdown with Oklahoma State, then finishing strong down the stretch. OU thinks, or I should say OU hopes, that finishing strong down the stretch will be good enough to get them into the Big 12 championship game. I think it probably will also be good enough. If they beat Oklahoma State, finish in a three-way tie with the Cowboys. Check my math here, Parker, as I go. If they finish in a three-way tie with the Cowboys, or let's say Iowa State, all three teams are 7-2 in Big 12 play. Here's your scenario in there. OU loses to Iowa State, right? Iowa State lost to Oklahoma State, and, of course, Oklahoma State would, in this scenario, lose to OU. OU's lost to Kansas State, and OSU's lost to Texas complicate things a little bit. So if you're OU, here's what you really need to have happen. Of course, you need OU to win out. That's the first thing. You also need, probably, or you would like, Iowa State to win out. Okay? those two things, I think, give Oklahoma the Big 12 championship game. OU versus Iowa State. Both teams would be 7-2. I think Iowa State would be the regular season champ. OU would be tied for Oklahoma State for second. In this scenario of Iowa State winning out, they would be 8-1, so they would be the regular season champ. But OU would hold the tiebreaker with Oklahoma State. Also in that scenario, I think you're going to need Kansas State to lose at least once to fall to 7-2, maybe more. But you don't want to get in some funky tiebreaker with Kansas State, in my opinion. So you know what? You need them to finish with 3 losses. That probably shouldn't be too hard, as they are in the tank offensively. Their quarterback situation is a mess, leaning on a true freshman. They're at Oklahoma State this week, I think, at Iowa State on November 21st, and Baylor on November 28th, and then Texas on December 5th. So I'm guessing there's at least 2 losses for K-State in that run. So in all probability, it's a long way of saying, first of all, if OU doesn't win out, guys, they're not in the Big 12 title game. They don't belong in the Big 12 title game, and that's the end of that discussion, and this year's a big, fat, ugly reload, right? So I think we all agree on that. But in all probability, if OU does win out, they're going to be playing on, is it December 19th? December 12th or December 19th? Haven't really figured it out yet. For their 6th straight conference championship. And Parker, for this team in 2020, that's an awful good consolation prize.
Yeah, it is, John. And, before I dive into that, I just want to add one final thing on Kansas, kind of piggybacking off what you said. You know how Lincoln Riley typically leads his press conference with, we're excited to play a really good so-and-so team, regardless of who it is. We didn't even get that from Riley this week in regard to Kansas. So not even he can find something nice to say about the Jayhawks at the moment. But no, this reminds me a lot of 2008, John. If you remember that season, you had Oklahoma, Texas, and Texas Tech all having beaten each other in some form or fashion, all coming down to the wire in the race for the Big 12 championship with one single loss. So there was a lot of chaos at the top there regarding who was going to get to the Big 12 championship, who was going to win the Big 12 championship. And of course, back in those days, when the BCS was still a thing, it was, okay, who's going to go represent the Big 12 in the BCS? And so this has those same kinds of undertones this season, John. And yes, what you said is 100% correct. Oklahoma should be rooting for Iowa State to win out. That makes it a lot easier for them because, look, Kansas State is a crippled team right now without Skylar Thompson at the helm. We saw that last week when West Virginia wiped the floor with them. So if Iowa State takes care of business and they hold on and they win out, then all Oklahoma has to do is dispatch Oklahoma State, thereby claiming the head-to-head tiebreaker there, and they're taking on the Cyclones in Jerry's World in December. But there's a lot of different ways that this can play out, John. There's a lot of different ways these dominoes can fall. And we have to acknowledge, to a certain extent, it's out of Oklahoma's hands. All they can do is just win the 4 games in front of them. But regardless of how they look in those 4 games, there's no eye test here, right? It's all objective. The Big 12 standings are going to determine the 2 teams that are playing in Dallas for the Big 12 title game next month. And so Oklahoma just has to win. That's all they can do. And they're rooting for Iowa State. That's what it comes down to. That's the easiest path for the Sooners, is simply for Iowa State to keep winning, for Kansas State to keep losing, for the Sooners to do what they got to do to get past Kansas, Oklahoma State, West Virginia, and Baylor, which, with the possible exception of Bedlam, they shouldn't have too much trouble doing.
Couldn't agree more. I mean, how likely is it that Oklahoma can win out? I think it's pretty likely. I know every year is its own little entity, and past performance and all that does not indicate future results, blah, blah, blah. But, man, I posted a tweet earlier this week, I don't know if you saw it, that Lincoln Riley, in his career at OU, both as offensive coordinator and as a head coach, has never lost to these guys. The finishing stretch of TCU, Texas Tech, Kansas, Oklahoma State, West Virginia, and Baylor. Against those 6 teams, he's 32-0 since he's been at OU. He's 20-0 as a head coach. Frankly, I like his odds of going to 36-0 and getting back to the title game. Speaking of 36, Oklahoma is a 37-point favorite against the Jayhawks this week. I don't think that's anywhere near enough points. Not anywhere close. Up next on the SI Sooners podcast, okay, fine. We'll talk about Kansas a little. Hey, are you a business owner looking to get your product out there to the masses? Let's say you run a hotel in Norman or a car dealership in Oklahoma City or a restaurant in Edmond, or maybe you're a small online business who creates and sells OU merchandise and you just want Sooner Nation to come sample your wares. Well, then consider advertising in this space right here on the SI Sooners podcast. SI Sooners reaches thousands of readers, viewers, and listeners literally every day, and the SI Sooners podcast is the ideal place to find your next customer. To advertise, send an email to allsoonersi@gmail.com or DM us on Twitter at all_Sooners. Follow SI Sooners on Twitter at all_Sooners. Find Parker at Parker Thune, and I'm at John E. Hoover. Our website, allsooners.com. Parker, I got the bad news today. I don't know how to break it to you. We're no longer the number one college website on the Sports Illustrated affiliate network. We are, as of today, number 2. Alabama took over the top spot for October, but that's only because Nick Saban got COVID and blew their site up. I mean, you know, it is what it is. Anyway, it's all free, no memberships, no subscriptions, no credit cards, and please don't forget, if you're enjoying this podcast on the traditional platform, you can always check it out on my YouTube channel, John Hoover Media. Parker, I think I've said this before. I like Les Miles. A lot of Sooner fans don't like him, and part of the reason is he talked trash and beat him 2 years in a row. But I like him. I like him a lot. Way back when I covered Oklahoma State in 2002 and 2003, this guy actually moved the start time of one of his press conferences, I think before the Cotton Bowl in 2003, if my memory serves. So I could watch my little 6-year-old daughter in her ice skating show. I mean, what head coach does that for a beat writer? It's unprecedented, certainly in the last 20 or 30 years. And then here's the thing on that. Here's the big kicker. When we had the presser, like a week later, 10 days later, whatever it was, you know what he did? He stopped somebody in mid-question and goes, Hey, Hoof, how was your daughter's ice skating show? I was just like, hey, man, that was like 10 days ago we did that. Guy's unbelievable. Another time, I think it was 2003, they're waiting for him at Big 12 Media Day, right? The newspaper room, you know, the big room. He's coming in from like a TV session or something, and he's kind of strolling up the middle of the aisle there, and he's going to the seat at the front of the room, and he looks at me, and he stops at the front row, and he sees me, and he goes, Hey, Hoof, how was your vacation, man? Where'd you take your family this year? It's like, they're waiting on you. The whole room is waiting on you, but you're stopping and looking at my vacation photos. So here's the thing with Les. He did stuff like that all the time. He really, to me, just showed that he cared about you as a person and you know, like anything. I had to write plenty of tough stories about him and his program, but the guy always treated me like a human being, not just the newspaper hack that I was. So I was kind of sad to see Les get fired at LSU, and while I'm glad that he's back in the Big 12, I was also kind of sad to see him take the Kansas job because, Parker, that thing's just a forlorn pit of despair. I mean, Lincoln Riley got a question yesterday at his press conference about how would he fix Kansas? And, of course, he didn't touch it with a 10-foot pole. But, Parker, I ask you, in the Jayhawks' current state, how would you fix that program?
Well, you got to start with recruiting, John. That's where it all starts. And you have to realize, yes, Kansas as a program is really, really bad, but it also hasn't been that long since they had some success, right? They won the Orange Bowl back in 2007. They've won a New Year's Six Bowl more recently than Notre Dame. Think about that. And so, yes, while this program is in a really sorry state, it's by no means irredeemable. I don't think any program across the country in the Power 5 is, with the possible exception of Rutgers, who I don't feel like has ever really wanted to be a Power 5 team because they know that they can't compete at that level. But regardless, as long as Kansas is in the Big 12, they're going to have decent recruiting sway, John. And I know that maybe sounds nuts to the casual observer, but Kansas is going to get some players. They're going to start to get some players, especially with Les Miles at the helm. Now, I will say this last week, they did get a decommitment in their 2021 class from Keon Coleman, who was a guy that Oklahoma was after pretty hard, 4-star wideout out of Louisiana. He was Kansas's top recruit in years and years, and he was going to be a big player for them. He's going to play basketball as well in addition to football, but he decommits. He's once again on the market. So that's a big loss on the recruiting trail for Les Miles. But it's got a solid quarterback coming in next year in Ben Easters. And I think you're going to start to see the program turn around, John. And it's definitely not the kind of thing that's going to happen overnight, right? Especially with the way that this program has spiraled out of control over the last decade. And you're talking about massive attendance issues, and you're talking about big losses to Group of Five, even FCS schools. I mean, hey, they did beat Texas, though. We can still, I mean, if we want to roll the tape back to 2016, they beat Texas. And we'll keep going back to that. But no, Kansas is in a position with Les Miles at the helm where they're going to start to see incremental progress. And I am by no means asserting that in the next 3 to 5 years, you're going to see them contending for a Big 12 title. I don't think that even is the goal for Kansas at this point. Their goal is to just get back on the cusp of bowl contention, get back in the picture, and lose the stigma that has become associated with their football program. It's the one that everybody really looks down on. And they don't have the worst program in the country. I don't think they even have the worst program in the Power Five, but they take a lot of flack for how bad that program has been. And I think there are plenty of kids out there, John, and this is one thing that Keon Coleman expressed to me when he committed initially. There are plenty of kids out there that are going to want to go to Kansas and change the narrative. I don't think that's an uncommon sentiment. And so, that's why I say it wouldn't shock me if in the next 3-4 years you start to see Kansas win 4, 5, 6, maybe 7 games out of a regular season. As long as Les Miles is there at the helm, and the pull that he has as a coach that has won a national championship, that has coached some pretty big games at big programs, as long as he's there, Kansas is on the right track. And it's going to be slow, but you're going to see progress.
Yeah, and Jeff Long, he's from the Joe Castiglione athletic director tree, so I think he's learned from the best. Doesn't mean he's going to put a winner on the football field, of course, but I think he's trying. I mean, last time I looked, Les Miles is still the only coach in the Big 12 who's won a national championship. So, yeah, Jeff Long is trying. I mean, if Les Miles can't do it, and not just can't do it, Parker, but they stink. They're as bad as they've ever been. This is tough for them. They're in a tough spot. They're winless on the season. Their best player, as you mentioned, opted out. Their other best player last year, who's actually, I think, maybe better, Khalil Herbert, hit the transfer portal last year. You know, he's 4th in the nation in rushing yards right now for Virginia Tech. The quarterback position has just been a graveyard for average quarterbacks to really never be heard from again. Their defense has probably over the last 5 years, if you think about it, it's been their bright spot. They produce some players. They produce some tackle leaders. They produce some big pass rush DNs and some cornerbacks. But get this, they are currently 101st out of 103 teams in the nation in scoring defense, 79th in total defense, 90th in rush defense, 55th in pass defense. Offensively, they're 98th in total yards, 82nd in rushing, 92nd in passing, and 100th in pass efficiency, and then 96th in scoring. This is bad. They're 85th in turnover margin, 99th in third down defense. 99th in third down offense, 84th in third down defense, 82nd in red zone offense, 94th in red zone defense. Hell, they can't even do special teams right, Parker. They are 98th in punting, 101st in punt returns. Oh, wait, they're 22nd in the nation in kickoff returns, 23.3 yards per return. I finally found something Kansas doesn't suck at. Now, listen, I get it. I agree with what you said. Les is in a massive rebuild. They have 67 underclassmen on the roster. They've got 37 of those are true freshmen, which is just mind-blowing. That's the most in the Big 12, and I think it's like top 5 in the country. Now, of those 37, 22 of those guys, true freshmen, have played this year. So, yeah, ouch. The quarterback depth chart for this week's game is as follows. Jalen Daniels, who's a true freshman and apparently the future of the program if he stays healthy. Or Miles Kendrick, who's a junior. Or Thomas McVitie, who's a senior and was supposed to be the guy this year, but he's only played in one game because he got hurt in the opener against Coastal Carolina. So, man, it is a mess. Daniels got the call last week against Iowa State, but then you see Miles Kendrick come in, and he played in that game as well. So it's not like they've got it settled. Parker, Kansas hasn't beaten Oklahoma since 1997. Let's talk about what Oklahoma can look forward to in this game then. The floor is yours.
I mean, They can look forward to getting a lot of guys action, John. That's about it. Like we were just saying, there's really no chance that Kansas competes with Oklahoma on even the most basic fundamental level on Saturday. Their program just isn't in the position to do so. Oklahoma right now is the team in the Big 12 that nobody wants to play. Let's call it like it is. They're playing better than anybody in the conference right now. Kansas is 0-7. Kansas hasn't won a game this season. They lost to Coastal Carolina in their opener. And granted, Coastal Carolina turned out to be a pretty decent football team. They're number 15 in the nation right now. But still, that's Coastal Carolina. That's not a program that you, as a Big 12 institution, should lose to. And so that's just kind of indicative of where the program is at right now under Les Miles. Massive rebuild, like you said. And so Oklahoma should take this opportunity on Saturday to essentially do what they did against Missouri State, right? Get a lot of guys some snaps, because I think one of the biggest things, one of the biggest benefits to being able to rotate as much as they did, especially with the younger guys against Missouri State, was you saw Marvin Mims emerge. I'm not convinced that Marvin Mims eventually takes on as big of a role in the Oklahoma offense as he has if he doesn't have a standout performance in that Missouri State game. And so maybe you find another diamond in the rough on Saturday. Maybe you get another true freshman, another young guy, come up with a really big performance against Kansas. And I know it's Kansas, right? But that's what we said about Missouri State when Marvin Mims went off, right? We said, oh, it's his first collegiate game, but it's also Missouri State. Well, as it would turn out, Marvin Mims may very well be the best true freshman in the country. So it wouldn't shock me if even before halftime, Lincoln Riley is starting to get his younger guys some looks, and especially here in 2020, where everybody is just kind of trying to figure things out as far as the future of their program and the direction of their depth chart heading into 2021. It's going to benefit the Sooners a lot to get a bunch of different guys some looks on Saturday. And one guy I would say that I'm really excited to see if and when we do see him on Saturday is Chandler Morris, because he only got one drive against Texas Tech, but he flashed some pretty decent potential against Missouri State in that opener, and it could be a glimpse of what's to come, maybe not at Oklahoma, but maybe at another program somewhere along the line for Chandler Morris, because let's be honest, he doesn't really have a clear path to start at Oklahoma. But hey, he's a pretty talented quarterback, and Oklahoma has a lot of guys buried on that depth chart that are pretty talented players in their own right. They're just stuck behind really, really talented players, the likes of Ronnie Perkins and Charleston Rambo and Romandre Stevenson and Creed Humphrey and the like.
Yeah, I wrote the story this week, and I asked Lincoln Riley the question, and he actually said, good point. The way elite teams stay at the top is by blowing people out and getting backups, and especially true freshmen, redshirt freshmen, young players, in the game. And then when those guys play, they get better and better and better every time they play. And pretty soon the senior class has graduated, and here comes this freshman class, and they're playing at a high level. It just perpetuates itself. So that's one way elite programs stay good, is by developing that depth at the bottom of the depth chart, getting those guys in the games and getting them on the field, getting them in real action. So I think that's one way that they stay on top. Another way is recruiting, obviously. But I think the Sooners this week, I think they need to use this game to kind of recalibrate a little bit, if you don't understand what I'm saying, if I could speak. Basically, keep doing what you're doing. Keep emphasizing the little things. The coaches are doing a great job getting guys to just kind of handle their business, play smart. I mean, they cleaned up the penalties last week, which was good. Stuff like that needs to continue. Keep taking incremental little movements, little growths. So this is important. But after this, think about it. You get that open date, then it's 3 straight weeks of championship November. Lincoln Riley's never lost a game in November as a head coach. And with Oklahoma State coming to town in 2 weeks, then the trip to Morgantown, then Baylor comes to Norman. And like we talked about earlier, you make that push for the Big 12 championship game and a cool game, a cool bowl game after that. Up next on the SI Sooners podcast, it's the mailbag.
Hey there, loyal listeners. Parker Thune here with SI Sooners. Are you a business owner looking to get your product out there to the masses? Let's say you run a hotel in Norman, or a car dealership in Oklahoma City, or a restaurant in Edmond. Or maybe you're just a small online business who creates and sells OU merchandise, and you want Sooner Nation to come sample your wares. Consider advertising in this space right here on the SI Sooners podcast. SI Sooners reaches thousands of readers, viewers, and listeners literally every day, and the SI Sooners podcast is the ideal place to find your next customer. To advertise, send an email to allsoonersi@gmail.com or send us a direct message on Twitter at @all_Sooners.
Final segment of the SI Sooners podcast. Parker, before we get to the mailbag, I think we're now, if my little calendar is correct, we're now about 5 weeks away from National Signing Day. Other than Caleb Williams putting together his furniture in his new Norman residence, what's going on in the recruiting world for Oklahoma? There's still a handful of big names out there who are officially not committed. What's the latest?
Yeah, John, well, I'll tell you what, first things first, I wouldn't count on National Signing Day being in December, as it conventionally is, simply because there are no in-person visits for this 2021 class until January 1st, so I wouldn't be surprised if they give them some more time after that January 1st date to get some visits in before they have to sign their letter of intent. So it would not shock me at all if National Signing Day got moved. Now, we talked about Billy Bowman on Wednesday, John, but I'll go back to it. That's a huge ad for Oklahoma. Huge, because if you look at the metrics, if you look at where Oklahoma ranks among the top recruiting classes in the nation, that was one of the biggest pieces out there, John. He was one of the biggest uncommitted prospects in this class. And he's the 5th member of our SI 99, the top 99 overall recruits in the country, to commit to Oklahoma. He joins Caleb Williams, Mario Williams, Latrell McCutcheon, and, oh gosh, I'm blanking on the 4th, John. Who's
Cody.
the 4th?
Cody
Jackson. There you go. Thank you for saving me on that. But, so yeah, you got 5 members of the SI 99 coming to Norman, and there may be more on the way. I think the odds for the Sooners right now are pretty good with Bryce Foster. Haven't ruled out Tristan Lee. It doesn't look as likely as it did a couple months ago, but I wouldn't rule that one out. Kamar Wheaton's still up in the air. Savion Bird's still up in the air. Emeka Egbuka, I really don't know where his head is at. But there's a really good chance that Oklahoma could close this recruiting cycle with a strong finishing kick, and I think that started this past Wednesday with Billy Bowman, John.
We got to get to the mailbag, but I'm going to say Oklahoma needs a better bag man. Need somebody to come in here and finish those big-name recruits, those 5 stars, those SI 99s. No? You don't think so, Parker?
Well, John, I tell you what, if we know anything from our publisher rankings earlier today, is that there's still an element of SEC bias out there. So maybe that's one area in which the SEC is still running laps around the rest of the country, is with the bagmen.
Okay, mailbag time. Let's jump right in. Parker, I got a question from @the Kurdish Mamba. I don't know if this is should be qualified as a question, but it's in the mailbag, so we'll read it anyway. My man Parker Thune was wrong twice these past 2 weeks, LOL. Said OU was going to lose to TCU, and TTU game was going to be a lot closer than most people thought. Not a question, but had to point that out. Parker, I also said OU would not cover at Tech, but you kind of had to stick to your guns with TCU, didn't you?
No, I really did. And, I'll own up to that. I thought TCU was a lot better team than it actually turned out that they were, at least on that Saturday when they welcomed Oklahoma to Fort Worth. TCU just didn't show up to play. And it is what it is. Some teams have duds from time to time. That was a dud for TCU. I think they're a better team than they indicated on that particular day. But you give credit to Oklahoma where credit is due, and they came out and took every opportunity to beat TCU and Texas Tech into submission, and they did that. So I was very pleased to see that from the Sooners. Yes, Kurdish Mamba, I will own that. I was wrong. It will inevitably happen again at some point along the line, but I have no shame in admitting it. Okay, John, your first question comes from Jason Moore. I like this question, John. I think there's a lot here. When is the last time OU has had this much talent on the defensive line?
So my gut instinct, and I'm maybe overlooking some really good players over the last 10 years or so, but my gut instinct is to say 2009. Yeah, Gerald McCoy's, I think, redshirt sophomore year. That team also had Adrian Taylor playing defensive tackle. He played right alongside GK. They were like twin brothers, man, the way they could kind of read each other. That 2009 defense now, I have said that was Bob Stoops' best defense outside the 2000 to 2003, 2004 era. Those guys, get this, they had Austin English at defensive end. He was a senior. Jeremy Beal, Big 12 Player of the Year at defensive end. He was a junior. Frank Alexander at defensive end. He was a sophomore. Remember David King? How good he was in like 2010, 2009? He was a redshirt freshman on that team. R.J. Washington was a redshirt freshman. And guys like DeMarcus Granger, Jamarcus McFarland, Casey Walker, Stacy McGee, they could barely get on the field. That's how good they were up front that year. And I'm telling you, ever since that team, OU's been kind of extremely average at defensive line. They've had some guys, like I said, here and there, but they haven't had any real dudes. Not like that team. Parker, Jess asks, what percentage chance does Perkins and Redmond come back and play together next year? First of all, wow, what would that look like this year? But what percentage chance you think those guys come back in 2021?
I'm going to put a 60% chance on it, Jess. I do think there's a good possibility that both come back. I think Redmond's coming back for sure, just because I think there's so much that is unproven with his injury history and his choice to opt out of the 2020 season. His draft stock is by no means set in stone, and so I don't think it makes much sense for him to jump to the NFL at the conclusion of this 2020 season. Perkins is the question mark because he's talented enough to do it. And I think this month is going to be really telling in that capacity, because if Perkins has a hugely productive month and all the NFL scouts start to take notice of what that man's doing and the havoc he's wreaking in Norman, Oklahoma, and he starts to get second round, even first round buzz, maybe you look at the 2021 draft and say, okay, it's Ronnie Perkins' time to jump. But again, I go back to the fact that there's so much that's going to be up in the air simply because of the pandemic and everything that we've seen over the last few months and how it's changed the landscape of the sporting world and how we're going to continue to feel the reverberations for months and years to come. And I don't know if it's enough of a certainty that Ronnie Perkins, in Ronnie Perkins' mind rather, to be able to confidently enter the 2021 draft and know that he's going to have an NFL home, that he's going to have an NFL contract that matches up to the expectations that would come with a first or a second round draft pick. And so for that reason, I think there's a very good chance that Perkins comes back and joins Redmond on the defensive line again in 2021, just because I think it gives him another opportunity to cement his draft stock. And barring injury, he's going to continue to rise.
Sorry, I'll just add real quick. I think Perkins is a long shot. I think he's gone to the NFL as quickly as possible.
Fair enough. All right, John. Your next question comes from a user whose name is Reed, I suppose. His screen name is Never Squib Kick. Respect, my man. How many teams among the top 25 would you pick OU to beat right now, John? How many?
Okay, so I'm picking OU to beat the rest of the top 25. We're talking OU right now coming out of Lubbock, Texas. Not the OU team from 3 weeks ago in Dallas or the one that lost to Iowa State. Listen, they're just playing like a different team. So we have to say right now, the team playing right now. Let's start at the top. Clemson? No. Alabama? No. Ohio State? No. Notre Dame? I don't know that I would pick them to beat Notre Dame. I'm not saying they couldn't. We've seen some really average stuff out of the Irish this year, so maybe they could beat Notre Dame, probably. Georgia, no. Cincinnati, I'd take OU there. I like Cincinnati, but not to beat OU. Texas A&M, number 7, I think, in the country right now. Yes, I would take OU against the Ags. Florida, I'm not sure about the Gators. I think if Florida gets some quarterback play of any kind, they're awful good. BYU, I think that'd be fun. I might take BYU in that one. Wisconsin, they played one game. Who knows? Miami at number 11. That's a good one. Miami, I'd probably take Miami, but I haven't really studied them very closely. I'm not counting Oregon at number 12. I don't think they've played it. They haven't played a game yet. Indiana, please. Oklahoma State, after last week, I'm taking OU in that one, but we'll find that out in 2 weeks. Coastal Carolina. Why would you ever count out the Chanticleers? No, they're not going to beat OU. Marshall, I think, is 16. No. Iowa State is number 17. Well, now see, that's a problem. Again, we might get that one down the line. SMU, no. USC, haven't played yet. Boise State, no. Texas, no. Michigan, fraud as usual. I shouldn't snicker about Texas. They took OU to 4 overtimes and they almost beat, or they did beat Oklahoma State. Auburn, no. Liberty, no for Liberty. So there you go. I hope you tallied that up because I went too fast to even think what I was doing at the time. Parker, Andy C. Wright on Twitter asks, why would Lincoln not give Romandre Stevenson at least 2 carries from the 10-yard line instead of settling for a field goal? It's a legit question. And then kind of a two-parter. Why do OU captains not wear a C on their jerseys?
Well, John, on that second question, you might have a better answer than I would. I actually don't know. I have not.
It's never occurred to me.
I haven't even thought about that. Honestly, I have not even. I realize now in hindsight that that's the case. They don't wear a C, but I've never. That thought has never crossed my mind. So if you have any insight there, John, feel free to offer it. But in terms of Riley's play calling inside the 10, look, I don't question it anymore. The man knows what he's doing. Sometimes those kinds of things backfire on him, but for the most part, I think Lincoln Riley has earned the benefit of the doubt. And I know I was pretty heavily critical of him for some of his play calls in the red zone, specifically in the Texas game earlier this season. But hey, the guy's a mastermind, and if you want to go back to that Texas Tech game, Romandre Stevenson's still getting reacclimated, right? And so the Sooners had him on a pitch count as it was, and they weren't looking to overwork him. Look, if they wanted to get Romandre Stevenson 6 or 7 touchdown runs in that game, they very well could have. Right, but they were easing him back into action. That's the reason why they got down to those goal line situations. And you saw T.J. Pledger get an opportunity. You saw Seth McGowan get an opportunity. Heck, you saw Mikey Henderson get an opportunity. Look, Romandre Stevenson is the best back in that backfield, no question. And if that was a game at any point, you can bet that he would have been the one getting the crunch time carries. But as it was, there just wasn't any need for it. So that's where I'm at with the whole situation, and I think as you continue to see this next month and the remainder of the Big 12 season play out, you're going to see Romandre Stevenson's workload start to ramp up because they want to continually establish the running game, and Stevenson is the guy to do it, more so than Pledger or McGowan. All right, John. Final question for you from Jeff Lawrence. The question is, the next Dupree, and John, I don't know, you might be getting a different vibe than I am here, but I would assume he's referring to Marcus Dupree.
He's referring to Marcus Dupree, and I think he's talking about Romandre Stevenson here. And the answer is no. In fact, the answer is always no. No. There will never be another Marcus Dupree. He was, listen, without a doubt, the most physically gifted football player we have ever seen. Ever seen in the history of the sport. Most physically gifted. He was better than Bo. He was better than Herschel. And you got to realize, I love those dudes. Bo Jackson and Herschel Walker were gods to me. Marcus was better. He's better than Jim Brown. He's better than Barry Sanders. Don't argue with me. He was. Not as elusive. Way more powerful. He's better than anybody you can think of, and I'm dead serious about that. I just wish he and I are about the same age, so I was like finishing high school when he was a freshman in college. I wish when he was 18 years old he'd had the head to match his body. I've become friends with Marcus over the years, and as I've gotten to know him, he's just such a nice guy, a wonderful person, a sweet, sweet man. He is kind, thoughtful, funny, but it tugs at your heart to know this guy was almost literally the most gifted running back that has ever lived, and circumstances in his life just took it all away from him before any of us really got to see him realize it. And it's sad. It makes me sad every time I think about it. I like Romandre as a running back. I've said it since week 1 that he's the best running back on the roster. I think he's even better than Kennedy Brooks and Trey Sermon. He's a guy that's going to play a long time in the NFL. I really believe that. But I think he's the best OU running back since Rodney Anderson for sure, maybe even Samaje and Joe Mixon. But he's not on Marcus's level, and frankly, nobody is. Our next podcast drops Sunday. Listen to the SI Sooners podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Google, iHeart, or wherever you get your podcasts, or on your Amazon-enabled device. Just say, Alexa, play the SI Sooners podcast, please. Or go to allsooners.com, click on the player, and listen on your phone, your tablet, your computer, and you can always watch the video version over on my YouTube channel, John Hoover Media. For Parker Thune, I'm John Hoover. See you guys.